Hello on July 15th, 2026. My name is Brian Madden, and you're listening to the Citrix AI Hotsheet podcast. Joining me today, as always, is my co-host, Dave Brear. I gotta say, Dave, I don't know if you can hear this. So I live in Paris, and we had a little soccer game last night where it did not end in the way that people in France wanted it to. I'll say it like that. And the city's testy this morning. The noise outside my window, just like a general level of honking and yelling, has been pretty epic so far. So I don't know how much of that comes into the show.
We'll see.
Dave, you're
Indeed
game tomorrow night.
Yeah, that's it. As a futurist leading the way, I think you're 24 hours in front of us. We have the England match today, and while I deeply hope we're going through to the final, the pessimist in me kind of expects that we'll be in the same situation with you sort of come Thursday.
How properly British. You're probably listening to this after the fact, so we'll see. We'll see how this goes down. But this is episode 4 of the Hot Sheet podcast. Let's jump right into it. We've got 4 topics for today. Wow, this world changes quickly. And the first topic, I want to talk about something called OSWorld. OSWorld to me always sounded like a 1980s computer supercenter. So maybe we talked about OSWorld on the podcast before. I've written about it. OSWorld is a benchmark for measuring how good AI systems are at using computers. So we talk about computer using agents, CUA or CUA, as people are pronouncing it. And, there's this idea, I know we talked about this quite a bit in the first episode about, we think that AI agents will need to be able to use computers and browsers and applications and workspaces and all that sort of thing. So there's a benchmark on this, and OSWorld is sort of the leading benchmark, I'll say it like that people have sort of coalesced around. OSWorld itself was launched in early 2025, so only 16 months ago. It's a 0 to 100 benchmark. They have a whole bucket of like 300 tasks, and it's like, can you open Excel and do this? Can you move a file over here? Can you update the spreadsheet? Things like that. Humans score about 72%, give or take, on this benchmark. And I wrote about OSWorld like a year ago, and the best AI got 45%. Fast forward to today, basically all AIs like have saturated this benchmark, and everything can beat a human. So even a Sonnet-class model today. So it's a big deal. I was like, oh my gosh, what happens when AI scores 100% on a benchmark? What's that going to mean? I think I literally wrote a blog post about this. Well, that day has happened, and as I sit here right now, like as I said, even Sonnet-class models can score in the 80s, which is sort of higher than the median human. So essentially, the OSWorld benchmark is not valid anymore because all the AIs can beat it. So
yeah, and absolutely. Once you get to the stage where everybody's beating the benchmark, it's time to sort of refactor it and change it and make
new
it
benchmark. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, hey, new benchmark has happened. So announcing OSWorld 2.0. To be clear, in no way am I involved with OSWorld. I'm just a consumer of this and telling you that this is a thing. So there's OSWorld 2.0, and 2.0 tries to shift gears a little bit and be the next level of challenge for computer using agents. So conceptually, OSWorld 2 is the same as OSWorld 1. The big difference, I guess I don't want to say downsides of OSWorld 1, but some of the things that had to change for 2 is most of the tasks in OSWorld 1 were just very short and kind of standalone. So it was really, here's a file, open it up, pull the data off of here, put it into an email, and click send. So it's very short.
Sorry to interrupt. As a child of the 80s, what strikes me is that's the 1.0 release of the OSWorld was very similar to how we were taught IT in school. We would go into school and we would be taught, this is a mouse, this is how you open files, this is how you print something. And we had whole qualifications that were based on those tasks. Kids today aren't learning in that way, though, and they're probably learning in a way that's more akin to what you're talking about here now, which is how do you use it to do something and have a meaningful output at the end. I'm guessing that's where this is going.
Yeah, and like kind of cutting to the chase. OSWorld 2.0. So first of all, there's not as many tasks. There's like about 100 tasks instead of 300 or something. But the average task takes a human about 90 minutes. So these are not really like, can you use a mouse to do this? I'll put this link in the show notes. I'm going on the OSWorld page, like they look at domain distribution of tasks, like across different, academic, teaching, coursework, presentation, video production, events, ticketing, office administration. Like they look at the challenges and like they classify the different capabilities that are needed: cross-source reasoning, visual spatial precision, implicit state inference, multimodal editing, tutorial following. I mean, it really, really goes deep. And they actually worked with experts in every single domain to come up with the benchmark itself. So we say that humans scored like 72% on median on the previous OSWorld. The new OSWorld 2.0, humans are essentially 100% because it goes really deep into, it's not about like, can an agent use a computer? Because again, that's like the answer is yes. Next question, OSWorld 2 is, here's this knowledge worker thing that I need to achieve. The computer is the tool that can be used to achieve it, but can the AI actually achieve this thing? So it's much, much, much deeper and sort of more like useful for kind of where we are right now with AI. A couple things I want to mention that are sort of interesting is there's a bunch of metrics that get measured. So in OSWorld 1, cost was not a metric. So like if the task completed successfully, it didn't matter if the AI did it in like 90 seconds with $2 of tokens, or if it took it 45 minutes and cost $200 in tokens. In OSWorld 2, they show you what the score is, but they also show the cost in tokens. And they also give more details too about like if it's like let's say you're using Opus, is it like max effort, extra high effort, ultimate effort, all that sort of thing. And it's kind of interesting because you sort of see like, it costs like Opus 4.8 Max can do this thing for $1,000 at high effort, but at medium effort it's faster, but then costs more, and it's pretty fascinating. So there really are multiple dimensions about what they're measuring in the AI models. The things I'll say right now. So Claude Opus 4.8 is the current leader, and it has an accuracy of 20%. So it's basically like able to complete 20% of the tasks. There's a bunch of others, like some different configurations of Opus 4.8 and 4.7 are in the 18%, GPT 5.5 is 13%. There's a concept of partial credit because what we find is that these tasks are so long, a lot of the AIs are like really good at moving through the workflow and they get like 80% of the way and then get stuck or confused and they sort of die off. So is that, that could be interesting for certain scenarios. So they're tracking that. The things I want to mention though is that we're recording this in the middle of July. So Opus 4.8 is the current leader. GPT 5.5 is on the leaderboard too, but GPT 5.6 is out now. Anthropic Fable is out now. Those have not yet shown up on that leaderboard. So I'm sure we're going to see, progress being made. What's interesting to me, so as I said, generally, the industry narrative was AI is able to use a computer. I think that we can say like that's captured by OSWorld 1 and that's sort of solved. The next step is, can AI understand enough about the problem domain and then apply what it needs to do to a computer, which is what OSWorld 2 is tracking. What's really interesting to me though is that as we think about where things are going, I mean, we do have to think about where things are going. Like we know that OSWorld 2 is going to become saturated at some point also. I don't know if that's in 6 months or a year or 2 years or whatever, but we know that's happening. I'm sure we're going to see with Fable and these other models kind of progress being made. So to me, it's just kind of interesting to think about, like, as you're thinking about how you use AI and how AI is working into your world, know that this domain is being solved also. And these models are getting, going to continue to get better and better and better. And you can't really like dismiss the whole concept of, well, AI can't use a computer or AI gets confused or whatever. Like people are fixing that. And as we think about things, we have to think about kind of where the technology is going. And now we have a good map that sort of shows that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that there's an efficiency cost concept in this as well. Because I think if we look at the narrative of where AI transformation is happening in the enterprise, there's a lot of scenarios where workflows are better when we put AI in the mix, but after the fact, there's the realization of just how much money some of these workflows are costing with current pricing.
And we're seeing stories now of people like, oh, humans are cheaper. Yeah. Like, yeah, it's great. You have a human that's maybe a loaded cost of $10,000 a month, and then you can replace them with AI. I'm using finger quotes here. But now the AI costs, $2,000 a day in tokens. And so and you still have all these rough edges and all these kinds of things. So I do love that we are tracking in two dimensions, like, and it's going to be more opportunities for consulting. Like, what AI do you want? One that's 90% effective at 50% the cost, or 80% effective at 25% the cost? It'll be pretty interesting moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that finding either workflows that take into account an evaluation of what's the right level of intelligence to throw at this problem, and either baking that into the workflow or baking that into AI model routers that sit in line between the workflow and the LLMs to make that decision, that's going to become critical to scaling these types of workflows in the enterprise.
Yeah, model routing, we should talk about that next episode, because that's becoming a hot topic, and I'm starting to have more and more conversations about that. Another hot topic, though, is about context and taste and understanding, like, these massive data sets and how you talk into the AI. And this something is a topic, Dave, that you've been digging into recently and really living in your daily experience at Citrix.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it ties in well to what we've just been talking about, because as these work benchmarks become longer and longer, and they're going to run autonomously for, you said, up to 90 minutes at a time, it doesn't just become a case of achieve this. It becomes a case of, well, what information are we feeding at the beginning of that 90-minute process to make sure that the operating assumptions are correct, that the output that we are expecting has been clearly defined and expected? Because you could have in a scenario where it executes flawlessly over a 90-minute session and presents you something at the end that is technically great, but it's not what you want at all, because it was operating on bad information, or you weren't clear enough.
This is interesting because, so like in the OSWorld 2, it's these great knowledge worker scenarios, but they're just, like, every task in OSWorld has, here's the bucket of context you need to do this task. So this is a task around business strategy, and they're like, here's all the strategy documents, here's all the, all these things. But the benchmark just sort of assumes that that data going into it is empirically correct. But when you're using AI in your actual company, how do you even know that it's seeing the correct data before the task begins?
Absolutely. And it's a problem that I've come across personally since we last spoke. And I'll kind of walk you through where I've got with this. I'll start by talking about, by answering the question, actually, just as sort of like a background piece. Like, I get asked all the time, as I'm sure you do, it's like, what this second brain thing, how do I go about getting started? What tell me all about it. And I've started explaining it in terms of, it's basically a second brain is a thinking environment, and it is the combination of two things. It's like a filing cabinet full of index cards with information that you want to think with, and it's like a detective's corkboard that you can take those index cards, you can bring them into a workspace, which is the corkboard, lay them out in a way that tells the narrative that you want it to explain, run the red string between the notes, make the links. And what you have at the end of that is a narrative. You have a working understanding. And this is what we then base outputs on. The corkboard is the thinking environment personified as such.
And so in this analogy, the AI, like, your context is all the index cards you're bringing, and the AI is what's sort of putting those, like, the AI is the actual process of figuring out which ones are relevant, putting them on the board, drawing the lines and connections.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely. So if you think about this working understanding, which is the context that we then bring to asking, now do this thing, which is the very end state of the thinking process. That working understanding is how we prevent hallucination or reduce the risk of hallucination. But there's two ways that hallucination can still happen. Because hallucination, just to be clear, in my view, is not a model problem. You can't say to LLM, don't hallucinate, only show me stuff you know, because the way these models work, it's incapable of following that instruction. It's an autocomplete engine that will try and put the next logical word in the sequence. The way you prevent it is by providing it all the information it needs so it doesn't need to make things up. So there's two ways that this hallucination can creep in. One is if we think about whether the information on that board is too thin. So the index cards that you have up there, the links between them, you don't have enough of them, or the information that's on those cards isn't right. So that's sort of hallucination by extrapolation, as the AI fills in the gaps of the stuff that you've done. And my whole workflow in my second brain is designed to prevent that, making sure there's enough information, it's of good quality, and that it presented in such a way that it doesn't have to fill in the gap. But the second way that the hallucination can happen, and this is what's bitten me in the last month, is where the data in those cards is incorrect or contradictory in some places. So the AI is looking at multiple contradictory information, and it's making its own judgment call about which of these facts are correct. And that's hallucination by bad sources, I suppose. It doesn't know which of these things to believe, and you don't have any control about how it's sort of doing this. And that's the problem that I've kind of come into in the last month. Because since we talked last month about me bringing my second brain and putting it into the corporate wall garden, so I can now connect it to more stuff, I've gone away and I've been connecting it to more stuff. Some of it through MCP connections. Like, as you know, we're using WorkIQ at the moment, and being able to bring in meeting transcripts, calendar stuff, files that I have in OneDrive, and bring that into the conversation that I'm having has been amazing. But whereas before, when I'm going to my filing cabinet and saying which cards do I want to bring into this thinking space to solve a particular problem, they were very well curated before. They were all things that I'd written, or all things that I knew, or all things that and they came in then. But now I'm bringing in context en masse. I'm bringing in data sources that aren't curated, and they're contradictory at times. So what I'm finding is that bringing all of these things in, I now have a context problem, in that I have conflicting pieces of information that I need to sort of reconcile beforehand. So
it's interesting because I'm sorry to it makes me think. So if you're pulling in all your knowledge graph from like the Microsoft Office suite, now I can poison your context by sending you an email. I can just send you something like, here's a new fact I just learned. And it's gonna be like, oh, Dave and Brian have a good relationship, and he respects Brian, and Brian said this is a fact, and it could be just completely made up, and I've ruined your whole day.
Yep. And I absolutely didn't promise to pay you 10,000 euros. So
right, if you yeah, right. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And is it going to check like the context header and like know like what if someone makes a fake account that says my name and then just emails it to you? And interesting.
So before, my sort of process with Second Brain is collect the index cards that matter to me, to the conversation, put them out on the board, make the links, assemble the narrative, do the thing with the working set of understanding. I've had to add a new stage to my workflow, which is assemble the index cards that I want before they touch the board, then run a reconciliation check for contradictory information, then working with AI, identify which is the authoritative source for the conflicts. Because it might be that I have meeting notes, I have a transcript, I have just notes that I've taken, I have stuff from a system of record. And each one of those things might be authoritative for part of the picture I need to build, but where there's a conflict, which one wins? So we kind of create this reconciliation map of contradictory facts, and then I make the judgment call about which one is the authoritative one, so that when we then go put them up on the corkboard, draw the lines, put the red tape in place, we can then reduce the likelihood of a hallucination due to bad data. And it just highlights that in an enterprise with multiple systems of record, multiple places where information exists, there's a lot of contradiction that exists. And I don't think we're unique in that regard. I think we're actually quite well structured in the data sets that we have. But the nature of fragmented systems means that contradiction will exist. And we need to find ways of reconciling those contradictions in the context before we think on them, because we will introduce error otherwise.
Two questions that jump into mind. First of all, the first one is like, how do you actually do this? Like, is it just you're telling your AI, like, look at all the things and look for conflicts and then surface them to me, and I'm going to walk through this? Is this a skill? Like, mechanically, how does this happen?
Yep. How I work is that I'm really explicit that I don't want it to do anything until I said I'm ready to go ahead and do things. So my initial conversations with AI are always me brain dumping information I have in my head, me saying, I think this information might exist in a previous note that we've discussed, or pull up the last meeting I had with Brian where we discussed topic X, because I want this to come into the mix. My first thing is literally opening that filing cabinet and building up a chain of things that I want to put into the thinking window, put into the workspace for this thing. So what I'm left with then is a metaphorical stack of notes that I want to do our thinking with. What I then do, or what I then used to do, was say, right, now we have all this body of notes assembled, let's start talking about what the patterns are. Let's start talking about what the common themes are. This is the story I want to tell. And we start laying them on the corkboard. What I'm now doing is, once I have that stack of notes, I'm saying these came from very different places. I don't necessarily trust everything that's in them. Look through all of these things and highlight to me any inconsistencies. It will come back with, depending on the data set, 20 or 30 things, and some of them will be pedantic. We can just disregard that. These things aren't contradictory, but many of them will be, document A says X, document B says Y. Those are fundamentally different things, which is true. And it might be that X used to be true 6 months ago when I wrote the note on that, but Y has context from a meeting where we got an update last week, and that's actually the authoritative information. So it's just literally taking that information, asking the questions, where are the contradictions, and then resolving them. And then I explicitly ask my AI to create a new note, which is a sort of reconciliation map, a data map. These are the sources. This is where it contradicts, and this is who wins. So that when I later act on all the information we've put on that corkboard, it knows which things, so it doesn't trip up over the wrong assumptions as much.
This is reconciliation map. I think that's the first time I heard that term. I feel like that's going to be a thing.
I think that's the first time I've said it, actually, but that's basically what it is.
So, okay, my follow, the next question I had in mind, maybe this isn't a question, but just like, it's interesting because you're one person in the company who's doing your own reconciliation map, and you know, you're reconciling all these like sort of objective facts, but also subjective, like here's my position and here's what I want to think about. So you have all these like lanes or like whatever that you're reconciling, but then it's interesting to think about what of those are valuable to the organization and what are maybe detrimental. Because my first instinct is every reconciliation map, publish that up into the organization's context, knowledge factory, AI, whatever, so that other people can benefit from that. But then it's like, well, your role with your lens might have a certain reconciliation, which by the way is perfectly valid to you, but that I might not want to use, or everyone else in the company might not want to use that reconciliation map. So even this becomes something that when you scale what we're doing at the organization up to the enterprise, how you scale that reconciliation map, that feels like that's going to be complicated.
Yeah, I agreed. And coming back to your opening topic about the agentic workflows, I think this is how, let me think, I'm just trying to decide how to say this. This is how people are not replaceable. This is where the human in the loop is required. Agentic workflows do not replace people en masse, but what they do is they extend the capabilities and the judgment and the experience of one person to be magnified much further. Because with the data sets that I've curated, with the reconciliation maps that I have specified with my judgment, taste, and understanding of a situation, that gives a much stabler foundation for an agent to go away and work for 90 minutes as me, as a representative of me, and give an output that I could stand behind as my own. It doesn't scale to make everybody's judgment go into a big homogeneous pot, which is just the judgment of the enterprise as a whole. Maybe there are use cases where that could be true, but I'm really bullish on the future of the human being that's doing the thinking being the valuable thing that everything is serving, rather than the thing that can be replaced. I just don't think we can for many work.
That goes back to something we mentioned in the last episode around how AI is not about replacing my job, but it's about like being a really good administrative assistant who can pull everything together to give me everything I need to like do the real thinking and like decision making, taste, judgment, those things that I need right there. Which
That's it. And
no, go on.
I was just going to add that I think in previous episodes I've said that the area I'm at is that I'm not particularly using much agentic stuff to act on my behalf yet. I'm still at the stage where I'm using it to amplify my own workflows, and I'm the center of it still, doing all the execution. But all of these things that we're laying here, my context vault, my reconciliation, whatever the term is for that now we've just invented, all of these things give me the confidence that in the near future I think I am going to be able to, because I'm really codifying what does thinking like me entail, and with those building blocks I can probably build agentic workflows for things off the bottom of that.
That's interesting, and I'm going to call an audible and roll into the topic we had marked as fourth. I'm going to talk about right now because this ties into. So last week we talked about organizational AI maturity levels, where we were talking about, like, I have this framework I built, like, the human AI collaboration kind of phases of framework, and it's like 7 steps, and as you use AI more and more and more, and we had talked about, it'd be interesting to see if there's a similar framework for companies. So kind of like to our point is every individual worker is using AI in their own way and doing their own things, and is there an equivalent for companies to say this company is at like stage 1 of AI adoption, stage 2, stage 3, etc. So last show I committed, hey, let's do that work and present it on this show. And actually I started to do that work this week or this month. I started to put together a blog post on it, and I just didn't publish the blog post because it wasn't that good. It wasn't that interesting or valuable. But it's kind of funny because the reason I didn't publish it actually is interesting, and that's the conversation today, which is, first of all, to say every major consulting firm has already done this. So they're like organizational AI maturity and having like roadmaps, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, Gartner, McKinsey, Deloitte, BCG, IDC, Forrester, MIT, they all have done these already. And they're like, and a lot of these, I mean, some of these are a year or two old. This is not new work. But what's interesting to me is every single one of these is a ladder. Like, you're here, you're phase 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And we had established last month that it's more of like a treehouse shape. Like, there are a few basic steps that go up the ladder, but then at that you kind of live at the top, and then you can go out in many different directions, and they're not necessarily on order, and you're kind of like circling, getting better and better there. Sidebar, I did look to see if Lego has a treehouse set, which they do. It's one of those, is it the Creator series where like people build, like make them, but it doesn't, it's like up from a few years ago. So it exists. I would like to get one for my little new shelf back here, but it's going to involve.
I'm going to say you have a gap that you could go into, I can see.
Yeah. While we're on this, so it's July right now. I live in France, but moved to France a few years ago from Seattle. So we're going back to Seattle this summer, and I will be going into our storage area and like finding my bin of flair, as my wife calls it. So I think next show we're going to do in a month from now, I'll be in Seattle. But when we come back in September, I will have fully populated, like some of this flair is temporary placeholders. So we'll have fully populated flair, and we'll see if we can get a treehouse to be part of that. But anyway, to the point is, all of these like consulting firms who built these organizational AI, maturity levels, it's a ladder. Like, you're here, then here, then here, then here, then here. And I don't know if that's the right analogy exactly. I mean, because one of the things that I took away from this for sure is, as we discussed, I think maybe in the past, an organization is made up of a bunch of individuals, and individuals are going to be, it's very jagged. Like, we see this at Citrix. We have people like you and me who are using like second brain deeply, and we're like using work IQ and all this kind of stuff. And we have other employees who are maybe on their phase 1 where they're just using, Copilot for transcriptions and like ask and answer. And we have some people who really aren't using AI at all. So you can't statistically, like, do you average those? Do you mean those? Do you median? Well, it doesn't matter, because an organization who has some 7s and some 1s, it doesn't mean the whole organization is a 3. And it also sort of depends on like who the people are. Like, if you have a leader who is like, a C-level person who's living in the second brain, like, and you can see these online. Like, you can see, I read like Aaron Levy, the CEO of Box, like is like very much thought leader, and he's like pushing top down that stuff in that organization. You see, like, obviously the AI companies are thinking this way, and they're using AI very differently than maybe a CEO who says, we want to be AI first. We bought everyone Copilot. hand wave,
Yeah.
go forth and be AI. So
I think why a treehouse to me works better than, as an analogy, than a ladder is that a ladder implies a single path to a single destination. So forget that people are at different stages of the ladder. They're all going to different places because they're coming up with their own workflows. They're figuring out in their own individual use cases how AI can help their jobs, and they're factoring around what they need to do their jobs. I could end up on a branch over here and you could end up on a branch over there. And we're both operating at a high level, but our workflows look completely different, but they're exactly tailored to the work that we're doing.
And then some of those, you need these early explorers. This is almost like an R&D, because if you're all doing your own things that are most interesting to you and solving the problem that you have right now, you can bring those back into the collective treehouse and kind of bring everyone on board, because every treehouse has different needs. Like, what's your biggest pressing issue? We need to like add a ladder so it's easier for people to get in. We need to like stock up on our water balloon supplies. We need to run a hose up here so we don't have to carry buckets up with the rope. We have to.
I want a tree swing, you know that.
We need a telescope. Like, what, everyone's building their own thing, and it's like kind of like, okay, we need to be bringing this back into the organization. So it's interesting that the maturity is not around like what you have, right? It doesn't matter like you have this tool and this tool and this tool. The maturity is how open are you to the process of understanding how change happens within the organization. So it's sort of like looking at who the people are who are racing way ahead. Look at who your people who are operating at levels 5, 6, 7, and how do you like empower them to take their learnings, present their learnings back into the organization, and make an organizational decision that, you know, these learnings are good learnings that we should try to incorporate into the organization. And so the maturity is, it doesn't matter like what tools you have, what your token budget is, that doesn't matter at all. It's how mature are you at the approach for how change happens. Because in the old days, it was pretty easy to throw money at the problem. You know, there's a lot of analogies made around AIs, like the consumerization of IT and the consumerization of IT. How do you solve the consumerization of IT? You know, buy everyone the iPhones and give them Dropbox and give them modern tools and modern applications and like VPN-less work from anywhere connections and, you know, throw out some Benjamins and you've solved that problem. And as we've seen with the narratives around like token maxing, like people try to solve the same thing. Like, go nuts, buy all the tokens, you know, use everything you need to. And then we find out that companies are burning, you know, thousands of dollars in tokens per employee per month with no really demonstrable ROI and no real ability to take what these individuals are doing and incorporate them back into the corporate organizational corpus of knowledge. So I'll put a pin in it right there, because I think this leads into some very interesting conversations. We're doing truly some fascinating stuff with Inside Citrix on this right now. And so I think this is a topic we'll dig into deeper in future shows. But I did want to kind of mention this because I did call out last week, hey, we will go do this work. And it turns out that work is not as simple as I thought it was. So we are not delivering, here's your map. If you want a map, the consultants have them. Take that for what it's worth. Okay, final topic in our last 10 minutes is I want to talk about a blog post in the future. Like, okay, so I did a blog post this month. It was basically explaining, you know, I am Citrix's futurist. What does a futurist do? How does a futurist work? And in some ways, there's the trivia. I always go back to Office Space. Like, what would you say you do exactly? So there's that of like explaining what a futurist does, but like that's just trivia. You can ask, you know, ChatGPT what a futurist does. What I tried to do in that blog post and what I want to do in this last segment is sort of show how I operate as a futurist and how I apply that like way of thinking to like all the uncertainties around the future. And then let's walk through an example of kind of where we are with AI right now in the industry. And hopefully that helps you like use some of these techniques to think about the future and like how you think about your own future. And
sounds good.
I'll say, first of all, a futurist job is not to predict the future, then which is maybe counterintuitive. I joke, if I could predict the future, I would be a polymarket billionaire and I would not need a job. So, and even within an organization, like if you say, well, here's the future that's going to happen, and let's prepare for that. That's great. If I could tell you what happens in 5 years and Citrix can do everything to align our whole ship towards that, fantastic. But the problem is if you only pick one future and then that future doesn't actually come true, then you're kind of screwed because you put all your eggs in the wrong basket. And so a futurist really is looking at like all the future scenarios, and you're taking all the signals of like your like experience, like all the news stories and what's happening, and you're kind of plotting those out to where things are going, and you're sort of saying like, okay, I think this could be a future, this could be a future, this could be a future, this could be a future. So you are really kind of like gaming. I actually use AI for this quite a bit. It's like super fun to, like get a glass of some dark liquid, sit in the bathtub, get your iPad, and like just chat with ChatGPT about future scenarios. So like planning out all these futures is like really intellectually interesting, and like that's what we talk about like over beers with each other. But at some point you have to walk back to like what the organization can actually do about those futures. And to me the easiest one is to like look at all these various futures and kind of find like, are there like things that are the same in all its futures, especially if you look at every step you go further in the future, your cone, like your circle of uncertainty gets bigger and bigger. But maybe all the futures have certain things like they're kind of right in front of you. So I know for the next 3 or 6 months, like this is like we can take these steps that are going to be valuable to us for everything in the future. And that applies at the organizational level. Like whatever you're doing, you listener, whether you're an interested party, you're a consultant, you're a Citrix colleague, you're an end user customer, you're an analyst, you're whatever. You can look at this for your company. You can look at this for your own specific futures. So like that's how we talk about things like you should use AI like a second brain and et cetera. Like these things are going to be true and helpful regardless of what happens. So,
so I'm assuming that you're looking at data points that could be true. And the further away from now those data points are, the less certain that they are. So like, for example, you mentioned second brain. I think for me that is a data point that's very close to where we are now. I think it's now. But there's probably a higher degree of certainty, and then you would branch off that certain data point to, well, if this is true, what would the next logical step be beyond that? And that would be less certain, and you could have multiple different branches on that. Is that how this works?
yeah, exactly. And it's also like one of the wild cards here is you have to know which data sources to trust. Like you have to think about the news cycle of the world right now is based on like hysteria, I guess. So like everything is very extreme. Like this model came out and is the best. This company, like, Chinese open weights model is great. US labs are dead. This like GPUs are going down, the environment's going up, water, power, all these things are very like the sky is falling. And so what you're saying is exactly true, but you also have to like plot out all these data points, and like you can ignore first of all like 90% of the stuff that sort of comes out, and a lot of the things like what's more important is the direction of things more than the specific data points. So like going back to this OSWorld thing, for example, what I wrote about when I wrote about OSWorld 1.0 a year ago was these models are going to hit 100%, then what do you do? That was a blog post for 1 year ago today. And oh, guess what? They hit 100%, now what do you do? The OSWorld 2, which is now at 20%, that will hit 100%. Then what do you do? So I don't care about the data point, which is like, oh, this model got this value, or this model was expected to be super awesome. Like, what if Fable scores worse than Opus? That doesn't mean that AI trajectory is dead, or AI will never use a computer. That just means, I don't know, Fable V Next is going to do better, whatever it is. So you really have to filter down and figure out like what you're actually paying attention to. And then, but to your point is, it gets more and more uncertain. I guess I should say it gets less certain the further you go out. And then if, I mean, gosh, at this point, anything beyond 5 years is like, just read science fiction. By the way, another sidebar. I just watched The Day the Earth Stood Still from 1951 yesterday. This is like, it's crazy how relevant that is today. This is like, a story that's like 75 years old, basically. It's still a great movie, by the way. $4 on Apple. You should buy it. But so if you look at where we are today in AI, like there's like 4 trends, like 4 axes of like what's happening in AI that I think is like very relevant, and I'll kind of give the futurist approach in each of these. So because there is a mainstream narrative, which is models are always getting together. The joke about line go up, costs go down. Models are getting better, they're getting cheaper, deployment's accelerating, diffusion can take time, etc. That is the mainstream narrative, and you could plan for that narrative. Like, I mean, again, to say like the models are always getting better. Okay, we can.
Can I just ask a
Yeah.
clarifying question? I think I understand the term diffusion. This is the capabilities up here. What people are using is down here. Getting that line to close.
Yeah. Great point of clarification. So diffusion is not a word that I invented. This is like what the real industry people call it. So yeah, it's like you can largely think of there's the capabilities of AI. That is what it can do. And then there's how those capabilities have been infused into the process of the point of view whoever's talking about this. So you can do this at an individual, like, hey, AI can be used to do a second brain today. But how many people are doing a second brain? So like 100% of AI can do a second brain, or 100% of people have access to AI that can do that. But like, I don't know, 1% of people, I'm making that up, are doing a second brain. So how do we get, there's a gap there. And that gap,
so
by the way,
AI transformation gap then that enterprises are battling with today. It's like, how do I embrace AI? How do I make use of the capabilities that exist today? That transformation gap is diffusion.
And you said enterprises because it applies at the company, at the person level. It applies at the organizational level. It also applies at the society level. I mean, so when you start looking at these maps of jobs and AI impact and economic and GDP and everything, it's like, well, AI capabilities are here. What is diffusion? Like, how long will that take to diffuse into the economy? And, this goes back to like those analogies we did, like when electrical motors were invented and factory electrification. Like electrical motors, it took 50 years for factories and like the assembly line to be rebuilt around the concept of electricity, even though there was nothing stopping that from happening, 50 years earlier. It just took from 1850s until like 1900s before it actually happened. And it wasn't a technology issue, it was a diffusion issue. So how AI capabilities increase, like the shape of that curve, like AI is getting better and better and better. This is out of our hands. I mean, the AI lab people are doing what they're doing. It's largely how it's going to happen is how it's going to happen. The government could put different levers and push that in different directions, but we don't really know. Diffusion, there are different ways to affect that diffusion curve. So, I think I talked about this on my presentation from episode 2, where I talked about knowledge work. Like, I think 20% of knowledge work is visible and 80% of knowledge work is invisible. And AI is interesting because it actually digitizes that invisible portion of knowledge work. So the way that happens is with like forward deployed engineers, which is like sort of consultants who come in and figure out how to like take your business processes and build AI around those. So the reason, I don't want to go deep dive into that topic today, but the reason I mention that is having forward deployed engineers who do this kind of work increases the diffusion curve. So maybe the gap between what AI can do and what you're actually getting out of AI gets smaller. So when you look at the big narratives, models get better, cost comes down, diffusion takes time but can be changed by having like more consultants. There's a bunch of different sort of things there. But each of these, though, is not necessarily a given, because if it was just models go up, prices come down, diffusion happens, then I would tell Citrix and our partners and our customers and the blog readers, oh, here's what's happening, here's what you need to do, go forth and prosper. But we cannot know that's necessarily going to happen, because we don't know if, like with diffusion, maybe everyone always said, like, and I wrote this last year, I wrote about the diffusion gap, and I said, well, you can focus on the basics because diffusion is always going to be slower. Well, I wrote that kind of before the concept of forward deployed engineers was very popular, and maybe diffusion isn't slower. Maybe a slew of forward deployed engineers will actually make diffusion faster. Maybe that gap will shrink. So maybe you won't have 3 to 4 years to wait for the best models to be diffused. You might have to go faster. Maybe let's talk about the bubble pop. We talk about AI is going to get better and better and better. So OSWorld 2.0 is Opus today at 20%. Maybe Fable is 30%. Maybe Fable.next is 40%. That's going to go up forever. Maybe. What happens if the bubble pops? And
it's built on constrained capacity. There's a finite number of data centers that can be built based on a finite number of silicon to run it. That can't continue to increase at the rate it has been doing.
And you have to look. There are really two, because everyone says if the bubble pops, look, here's the narrative in the industry. If the AI bubble pops, that might like very much mess up the economy, but it doesn't change the fact that the technology already exists. And people always use the analogy like the railroads. Like, yeah, when the railroads bubble popped, we still had all this train track that existed that we could use. When the dot-com bubble popped, we still had all this like dark fiber deployed in the ground that we could use. But train tracks is just sitting there, and dark fiber sitting there is like mostly free, and you can just buy it for a few cents on the dollar and like start using it immediately. Data centers aren't like that. Data centers are extremely highly technical and highly complicated. They need the power, they need the water, they need all the regulatory environment. These data centers, if you look at studies of like GPU failure rates, I was reading some semi-analysis on this, and like these things are run hard. And so you may depreciate a GPU over 5 years, but like it probably doesn't last for 5 years, just because they're running like it's like running your car at redline nonstop for 5 years. Like it's something's going to break. And there's all that talk about how profitable the AI like labs are. Like there really are only kind of two frontier labs right now. It's OpenAI and Anthropic. The other ones, XAI, Google, Meta, are like kind of second tier-ish. This is not me using those words, but the point is these models are all funded by debt. They're funded by continuous rounds of investment. If the AI bubble pops and that investment doesn't exist, it might not actually be possible to operate these data centers, because if they're selling us these tokens at a loss, it might not be where you can say, oh well, just these things go bankrupt, they get shut down. How long does it tend to have to go through bankruptcy court, and it's going to be dark, and then people are going to pull ahead? I feel very confident that if that happens, the U.S. government steps in. They take over control of these like core frontier labs and those data centers. Is U.S. government now publishing Opus for everyone at loss-leading prices? I think not. Best case.
I think not. We've already seen what government and the geopolitical scenario does to these models. It tries to legislate them, it tries to restrict them, and I'm not arguing for or against that decision. I'm just saying that that's the way that a nation would look at these types of infrastructure.
Yeah, like what are the facts? Fable was released. U.S. government shut down Fable. U.S. government turned back Fable on. Sol, ChatGPT 5.6 Sol was made available. They did not release it. Government held it back. Then government said it was okay. Everyone says, oh, well, there's Chinese models who are open weights. Maybe they exist today, especially in a world where, like, let's say the U.S. kind of stumbles a little bit. Is China letting their models go out in the world in open weight? Not the best ones. I mean, why would they? So my point is, we cannot say for certain that AI keeps on getting better and cheaper. It might. But
probably makes sense to plan for some either contraction or maybe even complete landscape changing in the market.
Exactly. So let's back up. Let's put our futurist hat on. So all these scenarios we talked about, there's acceleration, there's diffusion rates, there's a bubble popping, there's like the kind of geopolitical government impact on these different things. These all have different pathways and different levels of probability and levels of uncertainty. What do we know for sure? Okay, well, open weight models that exist today are always going to exist. So China and the other labs could, the proprietary labs could turn their stuff off. It's gone. China could decide we're not allowing the release of any new open weight models. But we have open weight models that exist today. They are roughly, let's say, Sonnet quality-ish models. And a lot of these models, by the way, you can run in your own data center. You don't even need a super crazy data center. A lot of them you can run under your desk with a workstation with a couple of 5090s in it. I mean, for $10,000 of hardware, you're going to see it in your electrical bill, but you can do this stuff locally today. So what do we know for sure will exist in the future? Sonnet-ish class models exist. Okay, what can you do with a Sonnet-ish class model today? You can do the second brain for individuals. You can do the organizational knowledge factory second brain. You have to deal with workers who, some workers are the tall poppies, as we said, and some workers aren't, and you have to figure out the organizational treehouse. We know that governance is going to be a thing, and you have to govern what workers can see and how they see it and where everything is, and that's like some of the work IQ and these other model routing, that stuff will exist. Tokens are not free. Tokens will have a cost, so we were going to want to measure how much spend we're doing, because even if it's free, air quotes, because it's in your own data center, there's still only so much capacity you have. And so you want to make sure, even if you're running 100% 24/7, that you're using your tokens on work that's most helping the organization. What were you mentioning before? iPhones. Dave, I think you mentioned this
Yeah, when we were chatting before we started, it's like right now you need $1,000 worth of infrastructure under your desk to get a sort of semi-decent replica of what you can do on a frontier model or a frontier-ish model. Within a couple of phone generations, we're going to be able to do this on, for the second brain use case, to a high degree of fidelity, we're going to be able to do this in a couple of phone generations, I think, just on the thing we carry around in our pockets. And we
Yeah.
will be doing.
And
Absolutely, we will
we
be doing.
learned, by the way, the big phone makers like Apple and Google are not like, obviously the AI bubble pops is going to be crazy for the economy, but neither of those companies are going out of business. They have other businesses that can fund their, the AI initiatives they're doing. They're not going anywhere. So, or at least I should say that's outside the mainstream narrative that I'm incorporating into my future. I'm assuming that iPhones will exist in the future.
Yeah.
But so that's the takeaway. To sort of wrap up this segment and really even the whole show is all of these things: acceleration, diffusion, bubble popping, government, geopolitics, all this uncertainty and all this stuff out there in the future. By the way, for those of you listening only to audio on this, I'm doing a lot of hand waving here. It's quite a fireworks show for the YouTube version. All of these things, all of this uncertainty, you don't have to worry about. If you're interested as like a hobbyist and you're enthusiast and you want to follow, that's great. But all this news doesn't matter. We know that Sonnet-class models will exist. We know there's a lot of things you can do with Sonnet-class models today. We know that Sonnet-class models are able to be run on infrastructure that you own and sits under your desk. We know there are open weight ones that no one can take away from you. And we know there's a lot of business refactoring, rebuilding you can do around those models. And all that work needs to be done, by the way. All that work needs to be done regardless of acceleration, diffusion, bubble popping, or future governance. So do that work now. Do that
absolutely.
work now. And
but what does that work look like? To sound like a stuck record, because from the whole episode, it's focus on the quality of the data that you have on hand for thinking with. It's putting that data in a place that you can control and move portably, so not locking it away into any one vendor's systems. And it's basically having that seed of information that you can point at a frontier model if things continue to accelerate and the capabilities keep going up and to the right. Or that same data set can be trimmed down and put on an iPhone and used for think of it. Whichever of these scenarios, focusing on where your data is and the quality of it is how you prepare for the future with AI.
And with that, that is the last word of episode 4 of the Citrix AI Hotsheet podcast. From myself, Brian Madden, for Dave Brear. Thank you for listening. We're back here next month.
Go England.
Go England. Actually, I don't know why French compatriots will say that much. We'll see how this ends. Okay.
Bye.
Be well.